Hi everyone, this is Broken Angel, and welcome to week 11 of Marc Brunet's one-year plan to learn to draw. I kept pushing myself to increase my drawing speed while increasing or improving my line accuracy and observation. Just like in week 10, I practiced gesture drawing, body construction, 2-point perspective scenes, and portrait drawings. With all that in mind, let's dive into day 1. On day 1, I drew 3 body constructions and did a decent job. The upper bodies were still a bit thin, and the lower bodies still had similar thickness. Regardless, both are better than before. I added the shins to the male figure and did a really good job with the limb shapes. My line confidence is getting better, but I'm still fighting the urge to chicken scratch some of the lines. Out of all the ones that I've done so far, I'd say that the third one from this day was the best, since all the shapes were good and the flow was captured well. Overall, it was a really good start to the week, and it showed how much my practice is paying off. On day 2, I did 3 5-minute gesture drawings and then made a portrait drawing. For the gesture drawings, I was happy with the proportions and flow, but I really had to fight with the rib cage and midsection on the second one to get the shapes right. I skipped the extra details today to focus entirely on accuracy. For the portrait drawing, I started with the clothes, which was going pretty well, though the collar ended up being too high. This snowballed and ended up making the jaw too sharp when I moved on to drawing the head shape. The top of the head ended up being too flat, and the upper lip was a bit off. When I got to the facial features, I ran into some trouble, making the nose too short and the bridge too far out. When I was drawing the eyes, I noticed that I was repeating some of the same placement and shape mistakes I made back in February. On the bright side, the hair and the details for the ear and mouth turned out well, and the eyebrows were good and helped me see exactly where I needed to adjust the eyes. Overall, the portrait wasn't my favorite, but it was another example of how one early placement error can change the whole drawing, which made the practice worth every minute. On day 3, I drew a 2-point perspective scene and started with the roads, moving on to the buildings on the left and finishing the basic shapes with the buildings on the right. Unfortunately, the divots for the parking spaces could have been better, but I did a good job of keeping the perspective throughout the drawing and made sure the long lines were straight, with less wobble than before. I noticed that the closer I got to the horizon line, the harder it was to keep things precise, but it didn't disrupt the scene too much. When adding details to the building in the front, I struggled a bit because the main perspective line was broken up, which made it tricky to keep everything aligned. Overall, I'm happy that my perspective work is staying high quality, and finally being able to add extra details feels like a great win. On day 4, I did 3 more body constructions and did a pretty good job overall. I'm still drawing the upper bodies too thin, and the heads were too small in the first 2, which seems to be my main hurdle right now. On the other hand, the lower bodies turned out well, and even though I missed some of the details on the third one, the overall structure is feeling much better. Overall, it was another day of solid repetition. Even when the results aren't perfect, each pass is helping me get more comfortable with these shapes. On day 5, I did 3 more gesture drawings and made another portrait drawing. For the gesture drawings, they're feeling more fluid, and I'm finding a better balance between proportions and exaggeration, even though I did leave too much space between the torso and pelvis this time. The mistakes were minor, and I was able to add more anatomy to the gestures. There's still room to grow, but my shapes are definitely improving. For the portrait drawing, it was a highlight of the week. I started from the bottom and worked upward, and aside from a slightly dropped shoulder, the clothing section was accurate. The jaw could have been rounded more, but the head shape overall was solid. The hair turned out really well, even with the improvisations I had to make because of the dark tones. More importantly, I felt much more confident with the eye shapes and placements. They weren't perfect, but the improvement was clear. The mouth and nose were also really strong, though I'm still working on the subtle curves of the lips. I finished the drawing with the ear details and felt really good about the result. Overall, this was my best day yet for both gestures and portraits, and I'm very happy with how things are clicking. On day 6, I drew a second 2-point perspective scene, and my line quality was a major win. I'm seeing very little wobble now, and the accuracy feels much more natural. The perspective was solid, and I varied the building heights when needed. I ran into an issue because I didn't measure the lines for the sidewalk or draw them back to the vanishing point, so they ended up a bit off. This was a good reminder to focus on the fundamentals even when things are going well. However, the car proportions were good, and adding various details like the antenna, sign, and door really brought the whole scene together. Overall, it was a great day of drawing, and it's clear that perspective is still my strongest topic. On day 7, I finished the week with a third set of gesture drawings and a final portrait study. For the gesture drawings, the proportions and flow are still strong, though I missed a chance for more exaggeration on the first one. The shapes were okay, but they could have been better. The neck for the first gesture was especially too long. I didn't add many extra details for this day, and mostly stuck to the core shapes. For the portrait drawing, I started with the clothes and built up the rest from there. I drew his back too far left, which threw off the neck thickness and the angle for the back of the head. I also struggled with the head shape, making it too short and slightly dented at the top, and I didn't push the face far enough to the left. Facial features were a bit of a mixed bag. The eye and eyebrow were decent, though I missed a few subtle details like the line under the eye. I was really happy with the nose and the combination of the mustache, lips, and puffed out cheek, even if the upper lip came out a bit large. The beard was a highlight, though the connection at the chin was a little tricky. I finished the drawing with the ear, which I think I handled well despite needing a bit more line confidence on the inner shapes. Overall, I made a few more mistakes than I would have liked for the final day, but it was still a productive session to close out the week. Looking back on this week, it was a solid 7 days of progress, and I'm proud of how it went. My gesture drawings are becoming more accurate and fluid at higher speeds, and while I'm excited to add more detail consistently, this week really pushed my observation skills. Even when it was a challenge, I could see my shapes improving and my proportions holding steady. With body constructions, I had a bit of a rocky start, but the upward trend is clear. I'm still refining the torsos and working toward a more reliable mannequin structure, but my line confidence is visibly sharpening with every study. The 2-point perspective scenes continue to be a high point. I'm capturing the depth well with only minor mistakes, and I'm happy that I'm able to add smaller details like car cutouts. My line quality is becoming much more intentional, even if I still have the occasional slip up. Finally, my portrait drawings are moving forward, even if the progress isn't always linear. This week reinforced that accuracy in the early line work is everything. If the foundation is off, it cascades through the whole drawing. Going into next week, I'm doubling down on that initial observation phase to make sure I am correctly capturing the reference from the start. If you're on your own learning journey, or if you have any tips you'd like to share, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. With that, that's 11 weeks down and 41 to go. I'll see you in week 12.